Hi, and welcome to a Small Medium at Large podcast. I'm your host, Gail Heisen, bringing you intimate interviews beyond normal boundaries. I want to thank all you listeners for subscribing on YouTube, for listening to us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and all the other sites. I want to also thank you for sticking with us. We're on our third year now, and we've had an assortment of very interesting guests. I want to say I'm grateful to the people who have recommended other people for us to see and interview. And I want to say how happy I am to be doing this podcast. So here we are in 2024, and we have a special guest today named Nancy Rhodes that I want to tell you something about. Nancy Rhodes is an international stage director, author, and educator who has directed operas all over the world, from Sweden, Finland, and Norway to Albania, Turkey, and the Netherlands. In New York City, she is the founding artistic director of Encompass New Opera Theater, where she has staged operas by Virgil Thompson, Gertrude Stein, Leonard Bernstein, Aaron Copland, Langston Hughes, amongst others. She is the commissioned librettist of the Theory of Everything with composer John David Ernest, a new opera inspired by physics' superstring theory of multiple dimensions. She served on the faculty of Manhattan School of Music for 12 years, taught master class at the Curtis Institute of Music and the University of the Theater of Nations. Her recent production of Angel of the Amazon, about the rainforest, toured to Massachusetts in November 2023. She is the author of Mary's Story, The Beauty of the Lonely Heart, which was published in November 2023. While in Turkey, directing a production of West Side Story, she had an overpowering spiritual experience while visiting Mary's house, Mother of Jesus, in Efasis Turkey, which resulted in the writing of this book. Let's give a warm welcome to Nancy Rhodes here today. Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Gail. It's great to be here.
Are you in New York City right now?
Well, I am in New York City, but I'm in Brooklyn, in my office, and so yeah, Brooklyn.
My grandmother came from Brooklyn, and my father was raised in Brooklyn. And my father was hysterical when my niece was like, "Oh, if I could only get an apartment in Williamsburg." And my dad said, "We lived there. We couldn't wait to get out of Williamsburg."
Well, it's a very popular place now among
Yes,
young artists and poets and
right.
musicians.
And
Yeah.
very expensive to live there. In his day, it wasn't like that. So I want to start off actually with your childhood. I'd like to know, where did you grow up? And did anything in your childhood or family prepare you to have this experience later in life? And did you grow up in a religious household?
Well, good questions. I grew up in a relatively small town in Pennsylvania, a town called Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. And I had a couple influences. So on my mother's side, uh, she grew up on a farm. My mother was the youngest of 12.
Wow.
And, and on my father's side, his family were teachers. So my grandfather taught physics, my father taught biology, and my aunt taught music and was quite a fine pianist. So I had the earth and I had the arts and the music very strongly in the family. So every holiday we would sing and play. And so I grew up with music, and I grew up with values of the earth and farming and respect for the animals. And so I think they have been very great influences on me throughout my life.
It's wonderful that you had both an educational musical background and a background in nature. So what about religion? Did you grow up in a religious household? Did you come from a Christian background, or did you grow up with Mary and Jesus, or what was that?
I did grow up in a Christian. We went to a Lutheran church,
Mhm.
I think it was, for me, I was always interested in different cultures, different ideas, from the time I was a child. So I grew up with the ideas of Christianity, but have been very involved in Judaism, in Buddhism, Eastern philosophy. When I worked in Turkey, I became more knowledgeable about Islam, and so I embrace the what I feel is the spiritual energy, and that really is very similar in all religions. So that's where I really tune into in my own life.
I think that's wonderful because that gives the broad spectrum of everything. And and I respect that very much. And I think that's a wonderful thing to be able to embrace all of it. So writing this book was a very different path than that of your incredible career. So tell us how you were inspired and guided to write this book, and was this something you ever thought you were going to do?
Well, yes. First of all, you're quite right. This was really the way this book came to me, and the book itself was quite a departure. But specifically, my work as a theater director took me to Istanbul, Turkey, and I was directing West Side Story with the State Theater of Turkey. By the way, it was a very large production. We had 75 people on stage and a 65-piece orchestra, and we were at the largest theater in Turkey, in Istanbul. So when I finished the production, my spouse, Roger Cunningham, came over, and we had decided to take a trip through parts of Turkey. And so one of the first places we went to was a place of ancient ruins called Ephesus. And there in Ephesus was a very well known library, an amphitheater, and all sorts of baths from the past and so forth. But there was one place that we wanted to see that needed a car, and fortunately we had one, and that was Mary's house. So you had to drive quite a distance from Ephesus, which we did. We went along the Meander Road, and it was early December when we got there. It was very mild, and we drove up. And I remember the house was very small to me. It was stone. It had very small windows. So we get out of the car, we go into the house, and I looked around and sort of, felt the atmosphere and thought, wow, I wonder how you could live in such a cold, small dwelling. So I was just thinking about that, and then I found myself going out the front door, and suddenly something began to happen. And there was this beautiful breeze blowing, and I looked up in the trees, and I could see every vein, every outline of the leaves in detail. And I was just kind of letting myself immerse myself in that. And then I was drawn to go down a little pathway and took a drink of water. And I turned around. I came back up to the front of the house. And suddenly I said to Roger, I think I'll go in the house again, just, for a minute. And he said, that's fine. I'll wait for you in the car. This time, when I went into the house, it was completely empty. The caretaker was not there. There were no tourists. I was completely alone. I sat down, and Gail, this is what happened. Suddenly, I was overwhelmed with a series of images that flashed through me like a film, one after the other, of what appeared to be the ancient world in full living color. And I somehow felt I was somehow part of this. But on top of that, I was filled with undescribable emotion. In fact, I was so emotionally um, overwhelmed that I thought I would throw myself to the ground and weep a million tears. So this went on when suddenly in my mind's eye, my soul's energy, I heard these words, tell my story. And it repeated, tell my story. And I understood this to be Mary's voice. And I remember I thought, oh, am I being asked to sell my worldly goods and go into the world and preach or something? And it came back, no, no, no. It was like a laughter. No, no, no. And it repeated, tell my story. And so I absorbed this and the emotion went on. And then I somehow pulled myself together and got up. And the first person I saw was the Turkish driver. And his eyes and my eyes locked. And I could tell that he could tell that something had happened inside that house. And so I was so overcome with this experience that I got in the car. I did not tell Roger about it until hours later. And then eventually I told him what happened, and he took it seriously. And we thought, well, maybe on the way back from the trip, we can stop and see if we get any more information. But as things occur, we went into the heart of Turkey and had wonderful experiences, almost biblical experiences there, and we did not make it back. And so then I came back home to New York City, and that began the second part of the journey, of the
I,
unfolding.
I just want to say this to you because I always share stories of my own life with our guests, but this is to just support what you're saying and letting you know how much I believe that that truly happened to you. Is that I have those same kind of experiences when I go to powerful, old, ancient places where I was in a place called Erden Zoo in Mongolia, and
Mm,
it's considered, I think it was the original capital during the Genghis Khan times.
mm,
And when I went into the temple, it's the only one of two temples in the entire country that were not destroyed during the communist rule.
mm,
It's a place where the monks live and do their work. And when I went in there, I was just all happily going in like a tourist with my Mongolian friends. And then I went and sat in this little small room where they're doing chanting. And within an hour of the chanting, I was out of body. I could hardly walk. I couldn't speak. I was deeply emotional, like you're speaking. And I
mm,
was experiencing the deaths of the thousands of monks that had been slaughtered there. And
mm,
just like you, when you said like a film, that's exactly how I described it. That all of a sudden a movie comes up in my third eye or inside the place in my, whatever place that is, it's with your eyes are closed. And I was seeing what had happened there and the tragedy and the loss. And my body was just grieving for the deaths of all these spiritual men. So I just want to say to our listeners, as an interviewer, I truly believe what you're telling me about the experience you had inside there, because I believe that many people have these, but often they don't share the story. So this is a wonderful, brave thing that you're doing by letting this story out and writing it to the public. So that's my only story I'll share.
oh, wow.
And
Well,
I
you may have stepped into a time loop where you really re-experienced and perhaps you had another life there. That's a
well,
possibility.
the same, what I'm saying for you is that I believe that everything you were feeling, the emotions, the things you were hearing, that I believe all that was very real. It's just that it's not in our current time and space. It's not in the present moment. your body's standing there in the present moment, but the other part of you is experiencing something that's, I call in the timeless place, where there is no time.
Mm.
So this will get me on to my next question, which is, as I said, I've had guides and guests. I mean, I've had guests and experiences myself that we call this channeling, or there's times where you're feeling the presence, or you're hearing this information from the intuitive voice inside. Did you feel this was like a channeling for you? Or was this the first time you ever had any kind of experience like this, of this spiritual nature?
Well, and specifically when we got back to New York, and the experience was so powerful, I felt I was truly asked to write her story. So I began to do research. I went to libraries and bookstores and spoke to people, and I never found anything about her life specifically. I found books on Mary sightings, of which there have been many around the world, in Mexico and Lourdes and Yugoslavia and so forth. And then there were books like A Young Woman's Guide to Mary's Wisdom, and certain scholarly books, but nothing that even began to illuminate. So I asked Roger, I said, Roger, I feel I have to do something. I was asked, what should I do? And he said, well, you meditate, don't you? And I said, well, yes. And as a theater artist, we're trained to go into deep concentration, deep meditation, and open ourselves to experience. So I did that. And lo and behold, I began in an oral presentation, I began to bring her story through me as spoken. And then when it became apparent that this was really happening, then Roger sat at the computer and he wrote down what I was receiving. So I received the entire book in this way. It took 10 years because I wasn't just doing this. I was working as a stage director. I was running my own company. I was teaching. But I can tell you this, that there were times when maybe 3 months, 3.5 months would go by, and I would go into meditation. I never looked to see what we had written, and it would pick up exactly where we left off. So in a way, this was a little bit of a test for me, because you can imagine this is not something I was doing every day. So I even, questioned. But then after a point, I really couldn't question, because the story unfolded in such a specific way. And as I said, it would pick up right where it left off. And Roger reports that sometimes Mary spoke, sometimes Rachel, her daughter, spoke. He said my voice would change
Yes.
with the speaker. So that's how the book came to me. I sat on it for 30 years. Okay, I just I didn't have the courage, I guess, to bring it out. And then, well, we had tried various sort of, but I think I would ask Mary in meditation. She said the timing of the book is ordained. And I thought, what does that mean, really? And from what I really understand, the timing has been chosen by the divine realms. And so a friend of mine, who's a wonderful actor and author, he said, my publisher, Sunbury Press, he said, I think he would be interested in your manuscript. Would you want to send it to him? So I said, well, okay, I'll send it. And I sent it, and very shortly he wrote back, yes, we want to publish this. Turns out Sunbury Press is in Pennsylvania, very near where I grew up. In fact, I mean, there are some connections. My mother grew up on a Mennonite. She did not become a Mennonite, but and he had some Mennonite people in his family. So there were these connections, and I thought, okay, this is the right thing. This is the right thing. So that's how it happened.
Well, you were also very fortunate to have a husband who was open to what was happening to you and didn't say, Nancy, are you getting a little crazy here? We just went to this little building and now you're talking about all this stuff. What are you talking about? I'm just saying you could have had that type of response and nothing judgmental about it. I mean, for some people or husbands or wives, that might have been too much for them. But he was able to be there and support you, which I think is very important when these things happen, because you can have moments, and I'm wondering if you did have any moments where you felt like, am I crazy or what is this? I mean, did you just think, I'm not going to tell anybody else about this. You didn't want to tell your husband when you first came out. Something happened.
Well, two things. First of all, you're quite right. If Roger Cunningham had not taken it seriously, you know, Mary referred to him as the scribe. So if he had not taken it seriously and worked with me hand in glove, I don't think it would have happened. Because I don't think I wouldn't have had someone to transmit the story, because it came through as an oral presentation. So I really honor him and am grateful for his part in all of this. Now, did I think I was crazy? No, I never thought I was crazy, but
Right.
I did question. I did question. I just questioned. Is this real? Where is this coming from? It was such a departure. And I have to say, as I mentioned, I grew up in a Christian church, but we never, Catholics revere Mary and they pray and they have a whole beautiful connection. But I grew up in a Lutheran church, so we really only thought about Mary at Christmas and at Easter. And so it wasn't as if I had a very deep spiritual relationship when I went into the house. So that said also to me, take this very seriously, because this is something very unusual that happened.
Well, I want to say, which I had, I want to say that I grew up in an atheist. My father was raised in a Jewish family in New York, and he raised us as atheists and with no belief in God. And I never went to very many, you know, I went to the synagogue a few times, and I wanted to see, there was a church down the street and I wanted to see what went on in there. So I went there once to see what that was. My grandmother told me it was a sin that I went there or whatever. But anyway, and I never have any, like, I've never investigated any time or energy into religious stories, or I don't know anything about Jesus or Mary or Rebecca, except when I said, oh, my cousin's name Rebecca, you know, this must be where she got it from. And when I read your story, it wasn't, I could not feel that it was not, it felt so real to me. The way the words were said, the way the feelings were passed down about what she was experiencing. This felt like the real story of Jesus to me, that I don't know anything about. But this felt like, oh, this was a spiritual man, and these were people who were rocking the boat, and the people that were in charge, the Romans or whoever, this was everything they didn't want you to be doing. And yes, this is what a mother and loving person would feel and be in a family. And so, I mean, I don't know if there's really a Jesus or a Mary or whatever, but after I read this, I felt that there really was. So I just want you to know, from my point of view, which has no information, I thought this story felt, well, readers, listeners, you'll have to read this to experience it yourself, but I felt like it was just all true and from the heart. And I just wanted you to know that because I don't know if some people think it's strange to have written such a book. I have no idea. But I was really, really impressed with that story and how it touched me. It made me feel like I wanted to remember how important kindness and compassion were, even though I feel that way. It really reset in my mind how important that is. So I just loved reading it. So anyhow, I just had to add my 2 cents in there.
Well, Gail, when you wrote some of this to me, it moved me to tears because it opens up a lens for me that says um, that that love and the opening of the heart, which are the two major
Yes.
um, themes that come out, reach every living being on the planet. And we're so separated now with ideologies and wanting to grab land and do a thing that we forget that we're all brothers and sisters on this little planet that is one household. I mean, it's just one planet, and we're all brothers and sisters, and we need to find our way to each other, to each culture and country. And Mary is a bridge builder. She is a bridge builder by just telling her very true story. Um,
Well, the only thing I ever remember hearing was people saying, "Oh, she was the Virgin Mary. It was Immaculate Conception," and I'm thinking the whole time, now that I'm sorry, I can't accept that necessarily. La la. And your story really explained it well, and that seemed like the real experience. So, anyway, I was very impressed with that. Where Immaculate Conception just seemed made up to me.
well,
So
it actually was because after Jesus was crucified, he was murdered by the Romans. Mary and one of the disciples, John, fled to what is now modern day Turkey, and of course the Romans were hunting down the disciples and followers and family. So people had to flee for their lives, and it was a very violent period. You spoke about your father growing up in the Jewish tradition, and as you, I'm sure, saw in the book, Mary is very much a Jewish woman, which is
yes,
exactly what she was.
and a
Um,
Jewish mother.
she was a Jewish mother, and back then the Jews had no rights. They were in occupied territory, the Roman Empire, and when the Romans wanted to take over a village or a piece of land, they would just ride in and burn the village down. And as you know, there's one scene where they had to flee. I mean, within a moment's notice to get out, and then the Jewish communities in various parts of the ancient world created safe havens where they had folks hidden in between mountain passes, and had people soldiers looking out to see ahead of what might come down the pike from the Romans. So it was a dangerous and violent period in which she lived, and in which Jesus emerged as a kind of revolutionary spokesperson for the people who had no rights.
Yes, and how she supported him as a mother, even though knowing that her son was going out to do this incredibly dangerous work. And you were getting the feelings from her of how it was to be a mother and yet also be the support person. And I thought that was a very, any person who's experienced the role of being a mother, whether it's their own children or anyone else that they've mothered, will really identify with the role that she was playing. She was,
Absolutely. And Joseph was also, it's very much a family story because, back in the ancient world like this, people who were different it was troubling because the community for safety had to band together. So if you went off on your own pathway, it created a danger for the community at large. And but Joseph and Mary, they stuck together as a family because they understood that Jesus was in touch with his heart and in touch with the divine father, divine creator. And so they wanted to support him in following his own truth. And in a very simple way, they took a stand for that, which I think was quite amazing in the time in which they lived.
I absolutely, and with the fact that the way she describes being a child and being able to have the eyesight of the third eye being open already, and she could see the rocks and the trees and the plants, and everything was alive and was communicating to her, which I think has been lost over the years, where people don't, except maybe in native cultures and other places, they've forgotten about the connection to nature that way. And that she wrote about that. I just felt that was another thing that made me feel this is a real story. This is really what was happening to her as a child. And that was not easy for her family to understand. Her other brothers, and they weren't having that. Jesus was having things, but the rest of them were not. So I thought that was, a beautiful thing to be able to share and try to explain how there's an openness and you're able to see things that other people were not able to see at that time. I read a review about, I guess it was like a preface on your website by a Dr. James A. Forbes of the Riverside Church. And I was so moved by it that at 88 years old, well, I don't want to tell the story. I was hoping you would tell that story of how you came to meet with him and share your book with him, and how he is I don't know if he's a pastor or a priest, or I'm not sure, but he has officiated incredible weddings, funerals, and many, many events over the years through this church. So he's a highly respected up there person. And I was wondering if you could just share how moved he was by your book and how he decided to really not care at 88 what anyone thought.
Well, Dr. James Alexander Forbes Jr. Um, was the first African American minister to to be the senior minister at Riverside Church, a very important, magnificent church built by Rockefeller. And it's right there by Columbia University, by Barnard, by the Jewish Theological Seminary, by Manhattan School of Music. All of these institutions are within 2 blocks of each other. Dr. Forbes is considered one of the leading, most respected speakers in the English language. And yes, he is a minister, and but a very incredibly bridge building person himself. He knew Martin Luther King Jr. He knew Maya Angelou. He hosted these great writers, poets, musicians, and speakers at the Riverside Church. So I met him. Oh my! I think I went and heard him preach a sermon, and he was so inclusive to bring people together in a beautiful way. And I ended up joining the Riverside Church under his tenure. He was there for 18 years, and during the course of that, we became friends. And I shared this story with him. And at one point, I went into his office with a couple other people. He wanted to hear parts of it. So all through the years, when I was sitting on it, and I was part of an interfaith dialogue group that Dr. Forbes was on, along with a Sufi master, a Jewish rabbi, just some Catholic a minister. So we can continue that association. And so I asked if he would consider writing the preface. Unfortunately, it was supposed to go in the book, but the timing just it precluded that. But yes, and he did embrace the story. And of course, he also asked the questions that, about the virgin birth portion. But he fully embraces this work and has been very supportive to me. It's given me a great deal of courage.
Yes, and when I read it at the bottom of the line where he said he knew that if he promoted or wrote about this book, that he could get backlash, or people might not like that he did this, and that he actually, his heart opened up bigger and grew more after reading this book, and that at 88 he realized he should be able to say what he wants and not have to care about what anyone else would say, because in his heart he knew that this was an incredible book. So I was very moved by that. And I know it wasn't in the book, but I was happy to find it on the preface. And we're not going to tell any of the listeners about the Immaculate Conception, because that they're going to have to read the book to find out. So we're going to leave that as the cliffhanger. So tell me, what about Mary's story is especially significant to you?
Oh, I think for me, she also represents the empowerment of women around the world. And at one point, she spoke about women, the mothers, the sisters, the daughters that have sat by and seen untold suffering and violence and all manner of terrible things, and have not always been able to do anything about it. And she gives an image of all these women, a sheep herder, a person working in a business, a coming together down through the mountains and the valleys and leading humanity into an opening of the interconnection, the love, the beauty of life, of all that we are, and to let this blossom. Now, she always refers to the men in the same breath, but she empowered the women to be at the forefront. And I think this is essential as we go forward in the world with all the conflicts that are going on. We need the voice of grandmother. We need the voice of the women to be the spokespeople. I just saw the film Oppenheimer.
Yes.
About the development of the atomic bomb. And what did I see? A circle of men. I didn't see any women. I didn't even see any people of color. It was just a circle of men, and they were making these planetary decisions that affect every aspect of our life. So we can't just rely on a small portion of humanity to weigh in when it comes to these important things. So we have to bring it into reality, and it starts with the family, the mother, the father, the sister. And then, there's the character of Rachel, the sister of Jesus, and she she also she was tuned in to the people who were outcast of the community. So if someone was old and sick, or they had a disease, or they had a disability, they would be thrown outside of the community onto the rocks and left there to fend for themselves. Why? Well, the community was concerned that it would spread disease and so on and so forth. And Rachel was taking walks, and she met these people, and she came off the path and went into and sang to them, offered them some fruit and bread that she had, and ministered in a way to each one of them. And then she began to make poles with flags that she would bring and give and put into the earth, so that they're lying there. They have something beautiful and magical to look at. So this family was some sort of feeling the soul and the suffering of the people, and they went about to do whatever they could do in their own way. And I think this is so important, because there's so much going on in the world, but we can't fix the whole thing. But we can start right in our own front yard, our own backyard, our own community, within whatever we're doing in our life. We can take steps to help. And so that means a lot to me in the story.
I experienced that feeling you're talking about. I've been fortunate, honored, or whatever, to be able to be immersed in other cultures. And about, in the 80s, somewhere in the mid 80s, I got involved with the Huichol Indians in the mountains of Mexico, in a very remote village, where I was actually the third and first white American woman to go there in this particular community. And when I saw the poverty and the fact that we weren't this was in the 80s, so it was the 20th century, and we weren't in the 20th century there, we were really in a very remote, and as what my dad say, because he's one of the few people I brought there, they haven't invented the chimney yet here. So the adobe room would be filled with smoke. And I had to learn that caring and being able to help them didn't mean giving people money. I found that was actually I did 6 trips there, and on that trip, I saw giving money, if it went to the man and not the woman, the money would then end up becoming maybe into alcohol, or maybe used for something else, but it didn't necessarily go to food and the things I was intended for. So then I learned that the way to be able to, and I schlepped from my house for 6 months. I collected, and my relatives are all in New York. Now there's more out here, but everybody sent me their old, and they're always in perfect condition, shoes and jackets for children. And I found enough shoes and jackets and food and clothing for 150 families that I packed in a pickup truck that I bought for $1,500, and took my dad, who's a mechanic. And when he went with me, that was our second trip together. When he went with me, the same feeling overtook him also, was like, I have to do whatever I can to help these people. And even though I'm this far away, I've learned it's not money the way to do it. It's some more direct manner. And just like, when I went through customs and I had this truck full of, I got everything, each difficulty would then get solved immediately. But there would always be a difficulty in trying to get these things. And all I kept thinking was, I'm just trying to help them. Why am I having all these problems? But when I got there, and then there were problems with the governor of the Huichols. And then finally, when I got the permission, and my father was like ready to kill me, we've schlepped this stuff all this way, and now they won't let you give it away, And four-wheel drive. There weren't like paved roads or anything like this to get to where we were going. And I was fortunate because he's a mechanic, so any issue that happened, he took care of. And the feeling of, I was exhausted after. It took about 4 days to give everything away. But it was not something that I said in my mind, oh, I'd like to do this. I was compelled. It wasn't, I had to do this. And now that I'm older, I was in my 30s then, early 40s, and I could do these things. But now in my late 60s, I've had to find different ways other than me driving all the way down there.
Oh,
And I I believe that's very real. And the way that, I mean, she put in your story, Rebecca put her life on the line to help these people. They were, she was risking whether she could get leprosy or any of these other things she was exposing herself to, but she never thought of that. And she was always encased in sort of a protective field, I think. And she was full of such joy that it even melted some of the Roman soldiers. I thought that was a very lovely story. How, anyways, I had never heard about Rebecca. I'd never heard, I'd never even knew who she was. So I learned a lot about that. And I think that that it didn't just focus, Mary didn't just focus on her own experience. She was sharing what her daughter went through also in her story. Who would you think would benefit from reading this book? Like, is this something you would say you'd recommend to everyone, or people that are searching, or where do you feel that this book would fit?
wow, that's a good question. By the way, just so her name is Rachel.
Oh, Rachel, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah. I just wanted to clarify, but I spoke at a book a senior book club. There were 9 people there. Each person came from a different background, a different discipline. There were searchers there. There were people who had grown up and reading the Bible, the Christian Bible. There was a very educated Catholic gentleman who had studied from day one with the Catholic school and the Jesuits. And then there was somebody who was a Southern Baptist from Texas, and somebody else that didn't, believe too much about this type. So it was a real mix. But each person, I was moved again by what they asked and what it meant to them. And a lot of what you're saying, Gail, is people took a personal feeling. They felt the story to be real. And the gentleman, the Catholic gentleman, said that what he came away with was he could just feel the love in the story. And then another woman that grew up in a Southern Baptist fundamentalist church.
Wow.
She also articulated the same thing. So I think it's for me it's a good story, and it's about a woman that we know as an icon.
Right.
Artists throughout the centuries have done paintings and sculptures, and she's almost sitting on a pedestal. But
Mm.
this book brings her down into the real world as a real person who actually lived and actually experienced the events that happened in that first century. So
And in the Bible, which is, I guess there's all different, there's the old Bible, I guess, the Old Testament, I don't know, but I know there's a bunch of different Bibles. Were any of these stories in in those books, or just the fact that she was his mother and the few things, nobody really did anything from her point of view or her experiences? That was never written in any of those Bibles. She was more just,
no, not that anyone has. There's some pieces of things. Actually, the Quran has more information about Mary than the Bible,
wow.
Old Testament or New Testament. Yeah, I mean it's sketchy, but it has more about her. So, but no, I don't know. There may have been authors who have written stories about her life, just as I have. I feel that I received, but no, nothing that is documented by an ancient scholar.
Well, I think you've done a great documentation of this. And I'm wondering now, how has this like affected your, like, has it increased your feelings of gratitude or your feeling, or how has the book, after it's finished now, it's out there? Are you having any more communications? Like, did she send a thumbs up or great job? Or any, has there been any other channeling, or whichever word you want to use for it, any other transmissions or any other words? Or do you still feel you could be in conversation with her? Or has there been anything else since the book came out?
Well, because I did sit on the book before publishing it, I do have quite a bit of additional material that is not in her
Oh,
story, that possibly, depending on how things develop, I could put into um, another book.
wow.
Yeah. So at one point, a friend of mine suggested that the book that I have, this one already, would be taken into two parts because, as you know, there's when she stops with her story and then she addresses us in today's world. One point, my friend had suggested that I put it into two volumes, two different books, um, and called the other one Mary's Wisdom for Today's World. And at first I tried that, but then it was like, no, that's not what we want. We want it to be one volume, and she would tell her story and then lead from some aspects of her personal story to address concerns that we're living, that we as people are living in today.
Mhm.
So yeah, I feel that I am still able to receive,
Yeah.
um, but now I am allowing her story to. I'm just trying to um, let the energy of it to go into the world. There's talk now of an audio book, and a friend of mine said, "Gee, this has got to be a film." So these things may
Oh,
happen, but I'm not doing anything to make that happen at this time. Um,
but they could come forth. And well, you're also still doing all these other amazing things in your work, so it's not like you've retired from everything in life.
right,
You
that's
have a
true.
busy life. uh well, that makes me think of this. Well, if you're a person who has produced all these amazing musical things, and maybe that's the route, maybe it's a play, or maybe it's a musical presentation, or I'm not sure because I'm not musical at all, but I'm just saying you're a producer, so this seems like things you could probably, maybe you could go that route besides an audio book, but something actually visual, that, and you could then film it, and you'd have your film and your live theater at the same time. You know how they have that now, where you go to the movie theater and you watch something that's been, oh, it's in Carnegie Hall or it's somewhere, I forget what they call it, presenters experience, something like that, where you can actually watch it at the theater and it's live at the same time. That would be a other great avenue. I mean, I'm not a market person, but
Well, people have suggested that, and that may come to pass.
well, because it
It's
kind of
another big endeavor.
brings your work and your, transmissions or channelings at the same, brings them both together, and you wouldn't have to take time off work.
Yes, and I mean, Gail, honestly, I am so relieved that the book has come out on its airwaves, because people were after me for quite a while. They said, "Nancy, when are you going to get that book out?" So I have to give Ronald Rand, I mentioned earlier, who connected me with Sunbury Press, and I also want to give a shout out to Professor Stanley Krippner, who connected us, the
Yes.
great author and professor, who connected us. And Roger studied with out in San Francisco.
In
Um,
fact, Stanley and I have a podcast that will be coming out in March to announce the releasing of his new memoir, which will come out in March. So we did a podcast about it, but we're not going to release it till March, and to announce his new book, A Chaotic Life. I think that's what it's called, A
oh,
Chaotic Life. I'm not sure what the
uh-huh.
publisher's last titling is going to be, but uh, so people should also that are listening know that Stanley Krippner's memoir will be coming out in March, and it'll be a very exciting read because he's lived. I, just from the interview I did with him about the book, how many lifetimes he's lived and how many people he was in the audience when Marilyn Monroe was singing "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" to John F. Kennedy. He was with
Oh,
Martin Luther King numerous times. He was with some of the most amazing, I've known him for almost 20 years, and I never knew these things until we did this interview about his memoirs. And the fact that he sat down and wrote hundreds and hundreds of pages in his 89 and 90th year of his life is he's unbelievable. He's his brilliance and what he offers, and he's just a humble, sweet, loving, caring, amazing man, and he's brought people all over the world together in so many places and has helped so many people. And I'm grateful to him for bringing us together here from New York and California so we could talk about this. I would have never known about this story if he
mm,
didn't tell me.
mm.
So will you be doing more things? Are you doing things to promote the book? Or I realize, I mean, it just came out only a few months ago. And so you must also be having a sort of a sigh of like, I finally did it. It's complete. It has a life of its own. I think you're like on a roller coaster. It's like a ride right now you're going on. You have no idea
Yes,
what will happen.
yes, we're doing some promotion. We have a website, and we have um, an email, and we're sending out some information and some other publicity, and reaching out to booksellers in the tri-state area and beyond. So yeah,
So
we're
since
yeah.
we have a podcast where some people are just in their car or they're in their office listening, could you say your website so that they would be able to hear this?
Yes, yes. So the website is www, Mary's, Marys dash story .com. So
Or
Mary's dash story.com. And then, you could go to amazon.com. There's a lot of the first 20 pages is there. There's also several people who wrote endorsements about the piece. And so, yeah.
well, we're coming up close to our hour here, and I'm wondering if there's anything else you'd like to share or speak about or tell our listeners before we close.
Ooh, well, as far as my theater work is concerned, we have a piece that we made a music video with a wonderful singer that
Uh-huh.
we have enjoyed. He's a tenor, and his family, and he originally from El Salvador. And we put together a music video, and he's also doing live performances, and it's called Unheard Voices, an Immigrant's Dream. And through 8 songs, and we filmed it outdoors in Peekskill, New York. It kind of tells the trajectory of his story as an immigrant artist, singer, and his family. We see aspects of his grandparents, his great grandparents. So that's coming up. We're going to be doing performances at senior centers in all 5 boroughs and also live performances in other venues. So that's coming up. And then our musical salute honoring American composer and librettist, that'll be coming up in October. And then The Theory of Everything, the opera that I wrote the libretto to, is coming up. And there are scenes, the main character is a physicist from Brazil, in Sao Paulo, and he grew up as an indigenous person. And his wife, Rachel, is her name, is a filmmaker, and they have an 8-year-old daughter. And so events happen, some of them tragic and some of them not. But the last scene takes place in the mountains of the Andes in Peru, and they all end up meeting with the elders of a major indigenous tribe. And so that also opens up the lens. So that's
Well,
coming up.
that's will that be for? I'll be coming to New York this year because I have a lot of relatives I need to visit. And I've met so many amazing people. So before I come, I'll have to look up and see what's available to, if there's any of your things out there. I mentioned a family friend. It was my mother-in-law's best friend in Manhattan. And I have to share it with you because you're an opera person. She was and because you did West Side Story. Her name was Elaine Jones, and she passed away a year ago, about, I think it's almost a year. And maybe it's a year, my timing is. And she was the timpanist in the West Side Story Broadway. And she
Oh,
was the timpanist on the album when we had albums, remember? The first
yes,
album
yes.
of West Side Story, she's the timpani player in this. And she
Wow.
used to play, she was in the San Francisco Symphony and New York. And she used to play tennis with Pavarotti.
Oh my goodness.
She was
Oh,
a
what a
black
great.
she was a black woman who paved the way for other black musicians in the future to be able to perform in symphonies because there was nobody before her that had done what she had done. She did a great accomplishment. She had a book called Little Woman with a Big Drum,
Oh,
Elaine Jones, and it's her story of how she started out growing up in Harlem, and she got, like scholarship to Juilliard, and she ended up having an incredible successful. She was an only child, had a very incredible successful life in the music world, and so she writes about all the different people and characters there, and anyhow, I couldn't not help but share that story, even though I spoke about it on another show. But she seems to be coming up, so I've got to share it.
oh, it's so important. And Encompass, we have a long history of multicultural casting and performers. And this is what makes life delightful and joyful and honest and authentic. So that is I'm glad you hear this. Tell me her name. I want to write her name down.
He spells it Elayne, and the last names is Jones, Jones. And she came up to visit about 3 months before she passed because she knew my husband since he's a little boy. Her and my mother-in-law were one of the, few interracial couples back in the 50s there. My mother-in-law was an actress on Broadway, and Elaine was a musician. And so both of them were in fields that they were breaking the barriers of what people were able to do of color. And my mother-in-law was the first woman on stage to play in a show called Green Pastures. And
Oh,
yes, and she played the part of Eve. And Ossie Davis was in it, who I saw was his
oh,
funeral was officiated by your friend, Dr. Ford.
yes, yes,
Just felt like a
yes.
funny little connection, and I don't know, that's part of our podcasting, is sharing our different stories. And if I've repeated them, I apologize to any listeners, but some new listeners may not have heard these stories.
Wow, that is wonderful. Well, you might even want to interview Dr. Forbes
I
because
he would be, I don't, if you can send him an email, and I would be more than thrilled to contact him. My mother-in-law was very deeply involved in the civil rights movement, and even helped illegally transport children back to their parents that were hiding in Canada. And her and my um her and my husband's dad I'm not sure how they did it. She pretended she was their mother or whatever it was. She was able to reunite a family that had been separated because of racial problems in the United States that made them have to leave. So the whole thing is a great story because they're not necessarily famous people, they're family. And to be able to share the stories, I think makes the stories live on. And that's what our show is about, is sharing stories, because I really believe that they do help to heal people, because you never know what somebody hears that, you know, brings up some sort of a memory or some sort of a healing. So I think this is a good way. And the old days, that's how things were done. They were shared by stories. And
That's right.
yeah, and I think that that's is a really a good, for me, it's my good, it's my form. I'm not a particularly great writer, but I'm a very good storyteller. So I have a book that hopefully should be out this year. And we're just, you know, doing up the last work on it. And I'm looking forward to kind of putting that out there and seeing what happens. It's called A Small Medium at Large, Adventure, Adventures of a Psychic Traveler.
Oh, that is beautiful, Gail.
So
Well, you'll let us know, and we can also help promote that,
yes,
your
well,
book.
that's very, very wonderful. So when I come to New York, I'm going to give you an email. And if you're free for lunch or dinner, I'd love for you to meet my husband. We're quite a funny couple. We do a lot of laughing.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, then you can meet Roger as well. And yes, oh, please,
Yes.
please. I
And
love this.
I'm going to see Stanley next week, going down to visit him on the 1st of February. So I already wrote him that. Just sent him an email that I was really looking forward to our interview. So thank you, Stanley. If you happen to watch the show, both of us have a tremendous amount of love and respect for you. Okay,
Yes, yes.
so I'm going to end our show if we're good. Is there anything else you wanted to share, or do we feel complete?
I am honored, Gail, to have been in your presence today. Really, your genuine open heart really has come through to me, and I thank you for this opportunity with my heart.
Well, thank you from my heart, and thank you for your beautiful book, which I thoroughly enjoyed. So, listeners, I want to thank you all for being here today, for listening, for sharing, for commenting, for telling other people about our show. And make sure you remember that we have people from all different walks of life and from all different places in the world. And again, I want to thank Bulgaria, Australia, and Norway for being the second groups of countries that listen to us the most after the United States.
Ah,
And everyone have a wonderful, wonderful week. Remember, stories can heal, and we'll see you soon. And have a great day. Bye.